manic state? You can type it in the chat or unmute yourself, but I'm curious to what everybody thinks about when we say that a person is going through a manic state.
I think of somebody, or well, I'll just say it. I think of my daughter who's been diagnosed bipolar, and I think about her when she gets into those into that frame of mind where she's just go go go, and she can do every and anything, and it's like her mind is just spinning, and it's like I want her to slow down, but she won't. And she's off of her medication. She's a young adult, but that's what I think, because I see her go from the high to the low, to where she just sits and cries and doesn't understand things. But then on the other hand, I see her when she's just like on top of the world, so to speak.
Right. That's a very good description. Does anybody else have some feedback on what you think manic state is? I like Maria, what she said. It's a state of erratic and uncharacteristic-like behavior. Michelle put not experiencing reality, hyperactivity. Okay, yeah. Okay, I think these are all good descriptors, and the issue with bipolar and it's kind of an interesting thing about when we talk about things like medication compliance and all of those things, is that the history of bipolar is interesting, because when someone's going into a manic phase, they tend to make a lot of social and cognitive errors. Okay, so they may go do things that are very uncharacteristic, such as go on at an extreme level, go on a bender for 2 weeks where they party all the time, they do all those other things. But on the other side of it, people going through the manic phase tend to think that that's when they're the most creative, and that's when they produce the most. And there's been some analysis that suggests that people like Leonardo da Vinci, the guy that cut off his ear, Van Gogh, and we know some modern individuals. We'll watch a video on oh my gosh, she sings that Christmas song, Mariah Carey, and the funny guy that plays the mask. Oh, Jim
Jim
Carrey.
Carrey.
Yeah, they all have been the ones we looked at historically. These two that I'm talking about actually have diagnosed bipolar, but we see that these people have had very creative lives. But we also will note that they went through very self-destructive periods while they were going through that manic phase. Van Gogh cut off his ear. So, and Da Vinci had periods where he would just kind of disappear, and we have no record of what he was doing. And so, and it was consistent with parts of when he was being very creative. He would become very isolated and almost self-destructive in nature. So that's kind of an explanation of a manic phase. I just want to make it clear too that there's two types of bipolar. There's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. The first one we're going to look at is bipolar 1, because that is when a person goes through a full manic phase. Where bipolar 2 is someone who has deep depression, and then they go up to mild to maybe no depressive episode, and then they'll dip right back down. Okay, and so we call that hypomanic or that type of cycling. Okay, the other thing that we should notice about bipolar is it's very cyclical. Okay, while there can be triggers in the environment that might trigger different phases of bipolar, If we subtract the triggers out, it's very cyclical. It can be charted based on weeks, months, and days. So and I wanted to make sure we make that differentiation, because when we get to some personality disorders that almost mimic manic and depressive phases, like borderline personality disorder as an example, we will see that those aren't cyclical. Okay. So like we've done with all our videos, I should, maybe turn on our PowerPoint slide. Like we've done with all our videos, and I just realized I didn't. Let's watch a short video that gives a kind of a good brief explanation of bipolar, and then we'll go from there.
What is bipolar disorder? The word bipolar means two extremes. For the many millions experiencing bipolar disorder around the world, life is split between two different realities, elation and depression. Although there are many variations of bipolar disorder, let's consider a couple. Type 1 has extreme highs alongside the lows, while Type 2 involves briefer, less extreme periods of elation, interspersed with long periods of depression. For someone seesawing between emotional states, it can feel impossible to find the balance necessary to lead a healthy life. Type 1's extreme highs are known as manic episodes, and they can make a person range from feeling irritable to invincible. But these euphoric episodes exceed ordinary feelings of joy, causing troubling symptoms like racing thoughts, sleeplessness, rapid speech, impulsive actions, and risky behaviors. Without treatment, these episodes become more frequent, intense, and take longer to subside. The depressed phase of bipolar disorder manifests in many ways: a low mood, dwindling interest in hobbies, changes in appetite, feeling worthless or excessively guilty, sleeping either too much or too little, restlessness or slowness, or persistent thoughts of suicide. Worldwide, about 1 to 3% of adults experience the broad range of symptoms that indicate bipolar disorder. Most of those people are functional, contributing members of society, and their lives, choices, and relationships aren't defined by the disorder. But still, for many, the consequences are serious. The illness can undermine educational and professional performance, relationships, financial security, and personal safety. So what causes bipolar disorder? Researchers think a key player is the brain's intricate wiring. Healthy brains maintain strong connections between neurons thanks to the brain's continuous efforts to prune itself and remove unused or faulty neural connections. This process is important because our neural pathways serve as a map for everything we do. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, scientists have discovered that the brain's pruning ability is disrupted in people with bipolar disorder. That means their neurons go haywire and create a network that's impossible to navigate. With only confusing signals as a guide, people with bipolar disorder develop abnormal thoughts and behaviors. Also, psychotic symptoms like disorganized speech and behavior, delusional thoughts, paranoia, and hallucinations can emerge during extreme phases of bipolar disorder. This is attributed to the overabundance of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. But despite these insights, we can't pin bipolar disorder down to a single cause. In reality, it's a complex problem. For example, the brain's amygdala is involved in thinking, long-term memory, and emotional processing. In this brain region, factors as varied as genetics and social trauma may create abnormalities and trigger the symptoms of bipolar disorder. The condition tends to run in families, so we do know that genetics have a lot to do with it. But that doesn't mean there's a single bipolar gene. In fact, the likelihood of developing bipolar disorder is driven by the interactions between many genes, in a complicated recipe we're still trying to understand. The causes are complex, and consequently, diagnosing and living with bipolar disorder is a challenge. Despite this, the disorder is controllable. Certain medications like lithium can help manage risky thoughts and behaviors by stabilizing moods. These mood-stabilizing medications work by decreasing abnormal activity in the brain, thereby strengthening the viable neural connections. Other frequently used medications include antipsychotics, which alter the effects of dopamine, and electroconvulsive therapy, which works like a carefully controlled seizure in the brain, is sometimes used as an emergency treatment. Some bipolar patients reject treatment because they're afraid it will dim their emotions and destroy their creativity. But modern psychiatry is actively trying to avoid that. Today, doctors work with patients on a case-by-case basis to administer a combination of treatments and therapies that allows them to live to their fullest possible potential. And beyond treatment, people with bipolar disorder can benefit from even simpler changes. Those include regular exercise, good sleep habits, and sobriety from drugs and alcohol, not to mention the acceptance and empathy of family and friends. Remember, bipolar disorder is a medical condition, not a person's fault or their whole identity. And it's something that can be controlled through a combination of medical treatments doing their work internally, friends and family fostering acceptance and understanding on the outside, and people with bipolar disorder empowering themselves to find balance in their lives.
Sorry about that, was having some technical difficulties. So some of the things that I would like to kind of focus on with bipolar specifically is, if you remember at the beginning of the course, we were having the nature-nurture debate about disorders, right? Well, how much of a disorder is contributed by the environment, the social situation, and life, and how much of a disorder is contributed by biological processes. And one of the things that this video kind of emphasizes is that when it comes to bipolar, looking at it from a biological perspective is much more productive than looking at it from a environmental, social, psychological perspective, because what we know about bipolar is it's one of the few psychological disorders that really has to have a medical intervention in order to control the manic and depressive cycles. So I just wanted to bring that up, because if you know someone with bipolar, it's really important to not think that it's a psychological or social issue. It's more of a biological issue. And just like we've talked about with other medical disorders and everything else, yes, there can be environmental triggers that trigger the disease. As we will see, with other organic diseases such as schizophrenia, which seems to have an environmental trigger of some type for the gene expressions or whatever goes on in the biology system to bring these out. So let's talk about, as we have done in the past, some of the symptoms and symptomologies that are associated with bipolar, and we're going to start with the manic episode. Okay, this is a distinct period of abnormally, and some of you mentioned this, abnormally and persistent elevated expansive and irritable mood, and abnormally and persistent increase in goal-directed activity or energy. And that was something that was very much noted when you all were describing the manic phase. And it should last at least 1 week, and present most of the days, like we've talked about with other diseases. And remember that persistent over time and over situations. Okay. So what are the symptoms that are associated with it? So during the period of mood disturbance and increased energy and activity, 3 or more of the following symptoms, and 4 or more of the mood is only irritable, are present for a significant degree and represent noticeable change in usual behavior. So we have to have at least 3 of these, and we have to have at least this mood disturbance, okay, that we listed right here, okay? So inflated self-esteem or sense of grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, maybe feels rested even just after 3 hours of sleep, more talkative than usual, or pressure to keep talking. So individuals I've worked with bipolar, you know, we finish our work together and they feel like that they still need to continue talking. They can't end that conversation. Flight of ideas and the subjective experiences, that thoughts are racing, okay? Very easily distractible. We see increased goal-directed activity, either socially or at work or school or sexually. Or we see psychomotor agitation, so purposeless, non-goal directed activity. So this is where we get the line between creativity and self-destruction, okay? And I'd emphasize this because many people with bipolar will experience this goal-directed activity, but then as the cycles get longer and worse, they get to psychomotor agitation, where they're doing things that just don't seem normal or don't seem productive in any way, okay? Excessive involvement in activities that have high potential for painful consequences, okay? So examples include engaging in unrestrained buying sprees, sexual indiscretion, or foolish business investments, okay? A lot of people with bipolar often state that they thought that they had a shopping addiction, not bipolar, because that was what they did during their manic phase. And so that's an example of this process, okay? And then during it, there has to be a mood severe enough to cause impairment, of course. And this is another thing, again, manic phases can be caused by drug abuse or certain medications or other treatments. So that's our rule out for the manic component, okay? And this should be something that should be noted, is that if we have a client, let's say we're treating them for depression, okay? And so they're receiving antidepressants and the like. A manic phase can present itself irregardless of being treated for that depression. And that's something to think about when you have someone who seems to be going through manic phases, but they're getting treatment for depression and those kinds of things, because antidepressants really have no effect on bipolar disorder, okay? Because most antidepressants work on the serotonin system, and we know that the bipolar system works more on the dopamine level. And those two things are very antagonistic with each other, meaning that when we have high levels of dopamines, our bodies naturally starts to reduce serotonin levels. And then when we have high serotonin levels, so when we're going through the depressive phase of bipolar, it'll push down those dopamine levels. And antidepressants really have no effect on the release of serotonin. They're mainly there to prevent the reuptake, to keep more in the synaptic gap. And so it's very difficult to treat with antidepressant medication. Okay, so we mentioned that hold on just a second. I want to make sure I have something. So in some cases, we can have full manic phases, but then we can have what are called hypomanic episodes. Okay. This is something that again is abnormal and persistently elevated, expansive, and irritable mood, and increased activity of energy. And again, this one lasts for about 4 consecutive days, and is present most day, every day. Okay, and again, what we will see in this area is we have 3 of many of the similar ones we see in a full manic phase, okay? But the difference between a full manic phase is its duration and its intensity. So in a full manic phase, we see, for the example, fully inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. In a hypomanic phase, they have an inflated self-esteem, but they maybe don't have the delusional grandiosity that is associated with a full manic phase. They just think that they're super awesome instead of thinking they're, Buddha, as an example, okay? When we see the decreased need for sleep, again, it's 3 hours of sleep, but they still are able to rest for a while. It's not as manic. They don't get as energized from that sleeping arrangement. So that's the difference between full manic and hypomanic. And again, it's more about the shorter duration that occurs in a hypomanic phase. Okay. Okay, and again, this is just everything that we've talked about. That is similar to the manic phase. Again, changes in functioning, doesn't respond to antidepressant medications or antidepressant treatments. And again, we have to make sure that there's not a physiological, such as substance abuse, going on that is creating that hypomanic phase. And I just do want to mention, because when I did work in the community, the communities I worked with had a lot of things like methamphetamine problems, cocaine type of problems. And the thing that is interesting in those communities is that they all seem to have bipolar diagnoses. And I just want to bring up, when we're talking about things like methamphetamines, cocaines, even prescribed medications like Adderall, all of those work exactly on the dopamine level. Okay? They all are aimed at increasing levels of dopamine. And it is this increased level of dopamine that creates these manic symptoms, okay? And that's why we want to be very careful, especially when we're working with addicts and people who are addicted to those stimulant type drugs, is should we have them on a bipolar medication, or should we have them on a medication that actually is focused on getting them off their drug of choice? So now let's go through the major depressive episodes. And this should look very familiar. It's pretty much the same as what we saw with major depression, but you will see the episodes are 2 weeks, and then we see a slide to a manic phase, and then we go through about a week of a manic phase, and then we dip back down to this depressive phase, okay? But these major depressive, again, we either need to have diagnosis with a depressed mood or loss of interest and pleasure. And 5 or more of these, and I won't go over these because we've gone over them before, but there's a depressed mood, interest and pleasure, a significant weight loss or weight gain, insomnia or hypersomnia, sleeping too much, psychomotor agitation, fatigue or loss of energy. I am going through them again, ain't I? Okay, let's not do that. But they're the same symptoms that we went over with major depression. And again, it's an impairment, and we have to rule out any type of substance or another medical condition, okay? So that's bipolar 1. Then we have what's called bipolar 2, okay? I want to make sure. Okay, let me go back. Bipolar 2 is more when a person doesn't have the disorder where they go through a complete manic phase, okay? And so it's more of a hypo or reduced manic episode, all right? So again, it's a distinction of abnormal or persistent elevated, expansive, irritable mood, and abnormal, persistent, and increased energy for at least 4 consecutive days. So it's a hypomanic. It looks like, it almost looks like a normal type of behavior, but we have the inflated sense of grandiosity, decreased need to sleep, and again, these symptoms should be looking familiar. Flight of ideas, distractions, those kind of things. But it's not, it's kind of hard to explain. It's almost like a person who has deep depression that all of a sudden for a few days feels good and feels okay, and then they sleep right back into that depressive episode. So it's a cyclical thing. Remember when we talked about diagnosis of major depression, the depressive symptoms were there almost every single day, across almost every situation, and it couldn't be alleviated in some way. When we're talking about bipolar 2, we have someone who has the cycle of major depression, but then they bump up into kind of a hypomanic phase, and then they go right back down, okay? And again, when we get to the depressive symptoms, one of the concerns about bipolar 2 is the depression seems to be a little bit more than when we talk about bipolar 1, okay? They both go through deep, deep depressive episodes, but with bipolar 2, that really can run to, you know, when we think about bipolar, we think about most mistakes are made in the manic phase, okay? But when we're talking bipolar 2, the majority of mistakes and things that go wrong in the person's life happen in the depressive phase of the disorder, okay? All right, so that's 1 and 2, and I said we should watch a video about someone who's popular that has a disorder. So I just kind of want to go through this video because it emphasizes how bipolar, you know, we've mentioned the creative parts of it, but it can also bring self-destructive parts of it. And so I think this is a good way to look at this disorder.
Superstar Mariah Carey revealing her secret struggle with bipolar disorder for the first time, telling People magazine she's been living in denial for almost 20 years. And Amy is here with more on why she's ready to share her story now. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning to you, Michael, and everyone. And there has long been concern about Mariah Carey's mental health following a series of high-profile public incidents. She says these have been the hardest couple of years I've been through, and now she is opening up about it after finally agreeing she needed help. She's pop music royalty with a one-of-a-kind vocal range. Mariah Carey's been ruling the charts for nearly 3 decades with 18 #1 singles to her name. But through her successful career, fans have watched her personal ups and downs, more recently documented on her reality show Mariah's World, and even this bizarre 2016 performance on New Year's Eve amid technical difficulties.
We didn't have a sound check for this New Year's. baby. That's okay, you guys.
Now, Carey revealing she's been hiding a secret struggle for nearly 17 years, a battle with bipolar II disorder. The singer-songwriter opening up to People magazine, saying, "Until recently, I lived in denial and isolation and in constant fear someone would expose me. It was too heavy a burden to carry, and I simply couldn't do that anymore." Back in 2001, Carey received her bipolar II diagnosis after suffering a very public emotional and physical breakdown. The star ultimately hospitalized. The disorder is characterized by unusual shifts between mood, energy, activity levels, and the ability to carry out day-to-day tasks.
No, Cindy, one more thing. And we give them positivity.
Let's go. Stop.
That was the same year of her whirlwind promotional tour for her feature film Glitter, which fizzled in the box office, and even rumors of an alleged suicide attempt, which her team has denied in the past. She spoke about her nonstop lifestyle on The View.
I never took a break. I never learned how to just put myself before my career. I just didn't. I just started making records basically right out of high school and never stopped.
Now, Carey says she's receiving various forms of treatment to help cope with her disorder, including medication, saying, "I'm exercising, getting acupuncture, eating healthy, spending quality time with my kids, and doing what I love, which is writing songs and making music." Despite her sometimes tough journey, the music powerhouse is finding her inner strength with a positive outlook. "I believe that everything happens for a reason, so maybe it just took me going through one of the hardest couple of years that I've been through in order to come out in a positive place on the other side." Now, one of the reasons why Mariah says she is sharing her story, she is hopeful that, and she says, quote, "We can get to a place where the stigma is lifted from people going through anything alone. It can be incredibly isolating. It does not have to define you, and I refuse to allow it to define me or control me." So she is opening up, and I think probably feels very free now that she's shared this.
Sure she's taking over. And we're going to bring in the writer of the piece, People's editor-in-chief, Jess Cagle. And Jess, this takes a lot of people by surprise that she's saying this. So when was she first diagnosed?
Well, she was first diagnosed, as Amy said, back in 2001, and she just did not want to believe it. You know, at that time, it was a very well-publicized physical and emotional breakdown that she had. And she just didn't want to believe it. And in her mind, although it's wrong, of course, she thought that there was such a stigma attached to having bipolar disorder that she would, you know, that her career would be ended.
So she didn't get medicated then?
She did not get medicated then.
Wow, so 20 years.
Almost.
Why is she now coming out today, now?
So she, as you say, she went through the hardest couple of years that she's been through. And I think, you know, we saw some of that. There was a brief engagement. There was an reality show. There was some professional upheaval. And I think finally she got to a place where she decided, I need to get help. And so she's recently been treated. She's in therapy. She's on medication that's working very well. And she got to a place where she was able to talk about it. She made peace with it. And also, she just didn't want to have this secret hanging over her, because part of the struggle over the past few years that she was so afraid that somebody in her orbit was going to tell this story for her. And so she took the opportunity to tell the story herself. She was very inspired by other people who've talked about mental problems that they've had, and she really does want to help people and kind of set herself free.
Yeah, this is exactly what Amy was saying, and it is when you're holding the secret and then you reveal it, it's very freeing. But you keep saying about how she was fearful that it would hurt her career, but I'm already hearing from people, because I posted on Twitter we were going to be talking about this, and somebody even said, "I've always loved her music, I didn't like her, but now I understand and respect her."
Right, I think it's going to help fans understand her. It's going to give people a lot more respect for her, because this is a brave, generous thing for her to do, and it will also help her get back into the studio and make music, which is what she really wants to do.
Robin, what do you say? What'd your mama say? Make
your message, and that's what she's
That's
doing.
what she's
That's
done.
what she's doing, and it is. It's going to really help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Always good to see you, Jess.
Nice to see you guys.
Right,
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News.
Superstar Mariah.
Okay, so that is bipolar disorder, and the thing that I liked about the Mariah Carey story is she does have the bipolar II disorder, which wasn't very recognized up until the recent 10 to 15 years, since more individuals have come out with that diagnosis. So that's one of the positive aspects of that story. But does anybody have any questions about bipolar 1 or bipolar 2?
You mean, I'm sorry, I just have a question. You mean for 17 years, she was able to just hide it or be in denial? I guess you can you can have PTSD or have bipolar or be depressed and not know it, correct? Or
Yeah,
would you know it and deny it by putting a mask on a daily basis, and still behind that mask, you know what you're hiding.
I think it's very easy to hide the symptoms from yourself, right? So, you know, she was again diagnosed in 2001 and she just didn't want to believe it. So, what she did is she did what a lot of people with disorders do and go about doing what's called masking behaviors, okay? For her, she would, if you look at her career over that 17 years when she denied her diagnosis, is that she would disappear for great amounts of time. And now she's coming out and saying, well, I just could not deal with life during those periods. Okay. When we talk about things like PTSD and the like, and I can talk about military PTSD, PTSD due to family violence, and those types of things, is that individuals become really good at masking and trying to avoid the triggers of PTSD. So when we get to that, I will talk about a good friend of mine who masked his in alcohol and masked his by avoiding different things. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Trinity asked if just one more time to bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Bipolar 1 is when a person goes through a full-blown manic phase. Okay, so maybe how about I give an example? So let's imagine that a manic phase is a car. Okay, so they're going through their depressive mode, and they're either in reverse or they're going 0 miles per hour. Okay, and then over a small course of time, they're going 500 miles per hour. That would be example of bipolar 1. Okay, bipolar 2 is you'd be going in 0 or in reverse, the depressive phase. And then all of a sudden, maybe you would be going 100 or 200 miles per hour. So it's kind of a difference in how manic, I guess you would say, a person would, or if we did it on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being a fully manic phase for bipolar 1, a manic phase for bipolar 2 would be a 5 or a 6. Does that make sense, Trinity? Does that help? Okay, good. All right. Any other questions? All right, gang. All right, well, so what we're going to start off on next Tuesday is we're going to start with stress disorders. And again, stress disorders are some examples of stress disorders are things like anxiety and anxiety disorders, phobias, panic, and those types of things. And it will include post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a stress response due to trauma that has been experienced. And so with this, we'll go over 2 specific ones. We'll go over generalized anxiety disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. But later in the course, we're going to come back to things like specific types of phobias. So specifically ones like going into social places, phobias or fears of different types of places or species or the like. So that's where we're headed. And so for today,